As promised, here is the screencast on finding reviews of the books that we'll be reading. Again, I know that several of us probably don't need this video, but there are probably a few of us that do. And so I wanted to just talk about finding a review and using that as the jumping off point for doing your readings for our class. So of course, the way that I have organized things, the first week that we'll spend with a book, we will be thinking primarily about methodology and sources. And then during the second week, we'll talk more about the book's content, the historical events that it covers, and even a little bit more about the author's interpretations of the sources that they use and so on. So this first week then, with Brian DeLay's War of a Thousand Deserts, in thinking about methodologies, what I'm talking about is thinking about what are the sources that he used, how did he find those sources, how is he reading those sources, how did he organize those sources, and then apart from that, what arguments does he make in the book, how does his book fit in with the existing literature on the US-Mexican War. And of course, that's something that we won't have maybe great expertise in because this isn't a class specifically on that event. But in book reviews, as well as in the introductions to the books that we'll be reading, each author situates his or her own work in the historiography of what has already been written on that particular topic. So think about then, at least from his perspective, what are the questions that he's asking that might contribute something new to this field? And you've probably noticed there are a lot of, I'm looking over at the book off to the side here on my desk. It mentions many of the awards that the book won. It was one of the first to kind of break new ground in terms of thinking about independent indigenous groups, Native American groups in the conflict of the US-Mexico War, so the period that came before, and in shaping the borderlands. We're starting with that book because of the genesis of the actual border that we have today came from the US-Mexico War. The outcome of that war drew the border. Then there was the Gadsden Purchase in 1854 that added a little bit to Arizona below the Gila River. But again, this is where the border began as we kind of know it today. So again, we got to think about in terms of methodology, the kinds of questions that I just mentioned. Since we're reading so much for this class, it is a good idea, as the Grad Hacker article that I've linked to in a few places notes, it's a good idea to start with book reviews. Scholars, not just historians, but in all disciplines, read each other's work and they write reviews that are published in scholarly journals in order to help people in the field get a sense of, of what new publications are coming out in that field, what the new approaches, arguments, and strengths and weaknesses of those respective books are. So again, a review is a good way to get started and to kind of get your feet wet jumping into the book so you'll have a frame of reference for understanding it. I think it's always a good idea to look at a few reviews because, as I mentioned, depending on what journal they're published in, they will approach the book from different angles. So let me get into this a little bit to show you what I mean. So I have my browser here opened to the Miller Library homepage. You'll notice that I've already typed War of a Thousand Deserts into the research box. This is just a quick and easy way to get started. I've already clicked research, and this has opened in a new tab. I didn't do it in real time because I'm in the back room of my house and my internet gets a little slow back here. So I didn't want us to be waiting while the page loaded. This is what comes up when you search War of a Thousand Deserts. You'll notice that the first thing here, this says article. It's in American History. It's published February 2009, so that was just a little while after the book was initially published. It's most likely a review. So things that are written about this that are in these kinds of historical journals, most likely a review. You can click into that to see. But then you'll notice the book itself is listed. Here's another review, Jeff Shepard. who's at UTEP, reviewed the book. He has a background in Native American studies, so you'll know where he's coming from in his review. But then again, what I wanted to point out is that there's a bunch of stuff that comes up here that are not reviews. So to narrow this down, go over here to the left-hand side to resource type, click Show More, then click Reviews. I kind of said a bit about this first entry just because this one may not come up when we narrow to reviews because it's claiming it's an article. So you might want to look at that one. Again, those are just some of the kinds of things you have to think about and deal with as you do research. Hopefully we won't have to wait too long for my internet here. I just clicked Apply Filters. You'll notice that first one didn't come up because it's not listed as a review, even though I suspect it is a review. So again, this will limit to just reviews, and if you notice, there are 85 of them in our database. So you probably want to choose a few that come from different types of journals. These first few are all historical journals. I happen to know the background of Cynthia Radding and Jeff Shepard. Cynthia Radding is a historian of Sonora in the Mexican North during the colonial period. And so that will be kind of the angle that she's taking. You'll notice some of these reviews, 2012, 2010, come quite a few years after the book was published. It was published initially in 2008. As I mentioned, it's a pretty important book in the field of borderland studies and the study of Native Americans, as well as the US-Mexican War. For that reason, people are still thinking about it and writing about it. So something to keep in mind. But again, please just scroll down and you'll notice the Journal of Interdisciplinary History, because it has an interdisciplinary focus, will probably treat the book a little differently than one like the American Historical Review. This one is a comparative review, so it reviews Brian DeLay's book along with several others. So if you want to get a better sense of how it fits into the larger historiography, the bigger literature, this would be an interesting one to look at. And then again, just scroll through and kind of ask yourself those kinds of questions as you go. You'll notice, though, after the first few, I said there were like 85 results. We're starting to get into things that aren't actually relevant to what we want. So you may want to click to load more results, but you may not. There are plenty of reviews here. Again, the reason I made this is just so that you'll kind of think through. We're thinking critically about the books that we're reading, but we also should think somewhat critically, or at least contextualize and situate the reviews that we get of those books as well, because reviews are going to contain certain perspectives on the book. So we should be aware of those as we use them to get started. But again, excellent method of getting started on our readings. You should do this with all the books we read this term. If you have questions or need any help, as always, please don't hesitate to contact me. And I look forward to our discussions of War of a Thousand Deserts.